From a geostrategic perspective, the Indian Ocean is becoming more and more important in the current era. The unipolar world that emerged after the end of the Cold War is changing to one where Asian nations such as China and India are gaining in prominence. The rise of these two nations, the rapid growth of intra-Asian and Euro-Asian trade, and the criticality of its sea lines of communications to the global economy have resulted in the Indian Oceans assuming a position of central importance in geopolitics. Major powers, including the United States of America, the European Union nations, Japan, China, and Russia, have strategic connections to and interest in this region. The world's two newest nuclear powers, India and Pakistan, are Indian Ocean countries. A high proportion of the world's political and other conflicts are in countries within the greater Indian Ocean region, which is still impacted by the aftershocks of American intervention in Iraq and Afghanistan. As a result of these all factors, and in order to contain the piracy that affects the Indian Ocean's shipping lanes, in improving the safety of the region through other means as well. Against this backdrop, there are several emerging trends in the Indian Ocean region that command our attention. The most high profile of these is the piracy and armed robbery by Somali pirates in a region that includes the Arabian Sea, the Gulf of Aden and Oman, and the southern Red Sea. This piracy has effectively taken the entire shipping community in the Indian Ocean region under siege. With the withdrawal of foreign forces from Somalia in the mid-1990s, there was a significant escalation of piracy in the Indian Ocean. Incidents of Somali-based pirates attacking passing ships and taking crews hostage became more and more common near the end of the last decade, seriously threatening one of the world's busiest trade routes. The range of the pirates began to increase significantly with the use of motherships that transported small skiffs to attack and capture commercial and fishing vessels. Ransom paid for these release of such ships and their crew increased over time, as did the physical dangers posed by the pirates, which led to considerable pressure on the international shipping industry. In response, several resolutions in the United Nations Security Council after 2008 enabled international action against this threat. Counter-piracy coalition forces, including the EU Naval Force, NATO Standing Naval Maritime Groups, and the Combined Task Force were set up. The activities of pirates in international waters. Apart from the provision of private security teams on board ships, Sri Lanka is also a major disembarkation point for security teams from other countries. The government provides logistical support for the movement of weapons and ammunition, including the provision of bonded warehouses for their storage. More recently, Sri Lanka has begun operating stringently regulated and secure floating armories to fulfill this requirement. Utmost precautions are taken to ensure complete accountability for the weapons and equipment provided. Furthermore, the provision of training facilities for sea marshals has begun in the very recent past. This is especially important because the international maritime organizations require all sea marshals to be properly trained and certified. With the provision of all of these services, Sri Lanka is increasingly gaining recognition as an important contributor to the security of the sea lanes of communication in the Indian Ocean. It is likely that the demand for these services will continue until counter-piracy actions by international fleets and continued use of onboard private security combine to deter piracy in this region. The illicit trafficking of narcotics, weapons and people is another serious issue in the Indian Ocean region. Although narcotic smuggling through land routes is at a higher scale than it's on sea, the volume of drugs that is trafficking through these seas is nevertheless considerable. Opiates from the Golden Crescent and the Golden Triangle are smuggled through the Indian Ocean, along with amphetamine-type substances and cannabis from these areas and other regional countries. Drug cartels use fishing boats, specially modified vessels, and even exploit containerized cargo to transport drugs from their point of origin to their destinations all over the world. It should be noted that money generated from the drug trade has also been linked to terrorism. For example, the LTTE used money it raised from its drug smuggling operations to fund weapon purchases for its terrorist activities in Sri Lanka. The smuggling of weapons through the Indian Ocean is a serious issue that can have a very detrimental impact on the national security of nations in its littorals. From the mid-1980s until its defeat in 2009, the LTT managed to smuggle thousands of items of heavy weapons, light weapons, small arms, and sophisticated equipment through the seal of its terrorist activities in Sri Lanka. Legally procured by the LTT's international network and smuggled to Sri Lanka via international waters through more than 20 large vessels and large number of trawlers registered under different flags. The LTT's large vessels lay at anchor in international waters more than 1,000 nautical miles away from Sri Lanka, effectively functioning as floating warehouses. Smaller vessels were dispatched to smuggle these items to the coast. During the humanitarian operation to liberate the country from the LTT's terrorism, the Sri Lanka Navy ventured into distant high seas on many occasions and destroyed nearly 12 of these floating warehouses. That this organized and sophisticated weapon smuggling racket has been destroyed in this part of the Indian Ocean has considerably improved maritime security in this region. But the potential exists for similar activities to fuel armed insurgencies and terrorism in coastal nations. Human smuggling in the Indian Ocean is another major illicit activity in European nations as well as the Gulf states. Victims of human traffickers will often find themselves in serious trouble, often with their lives at risk. Having sold their properties and given their entire wealth to the smugglers, they will find themselves trapped on board unsafe vessels in terrible conditions, alongside hundreds of other illegal immigrants. Even if they survive transit, they are sometimes sold into servitude or more often find themselves stranded in temporary camps at their intended destinations.